This is the KM3000 and this is the KM4000, Kabira Mobility's latest two products in India. Now this may be the first time that you're hearing of the brand, but Kabira tells us that it's been around for nearly 4 years now. And so far, it's been selling electric scooters predominantly in its local market of Goa. Now the brand vehemently tells us that these two models are completely indigenous designs, designed, developed and manufactured at its local plant in Goa.
Kabira says the development of both motorcycles started in August 2019 and that it had its first prototypes on display at the Auto Expo less than 6 months later. For reference, the average two-wheeler takes about 3 to 4 years at minimum to develop from scratch. Nevertheless, despite the company's claims that this is completely local, take a closer look at either of them and you'll beg to differ.
Now there's no denying the fact that this design is an obvious ripoff of the Ninja 300, and we even found a bike that looks exactly like this listed on a Chinese wholesale website for just about $1,000. There are other giveaways as well, like obviously removed logos in the key fob and even a Chinese web domain stamped onto one of the components in Kabira's own product brochure.
Kabira tells us that the production-ready models will go on sale by April or May this year and that these are near production units. The genuineness of some of the company's claims are quite hazy, but let's find out what these bikes are like. Like I said, the KM3000 looks nearly identical to the Kawasaki Ninja, and when I pointed Google Lens at the bike, it thought so too. The KM4000 on the other hand looks a lot like the Z1000. The tank, mid and tail section look nearly identical to those on the liter class Kawasaki, while the headlight bears a striking resemblance to the older Yamaha FZ. We were told these were pre-production units, but the bikes are scheduled to go on sale in the next couple of months, so keeping that in mind, quality levels were rather disappointing. The KM3000 that I was riding seemed particularly worn with missing bolts, rusted components and lots of exposed wiring. Unfortunately, that wasn't the worst of it. I rode through a pothole and this snapped the right side foot peg bracket clean off the bike. On the other hand, the KM4000 seemed comparatively better put together in some regards. The finishing of the paint, for instance, was notably better on the surface, but if you made the effort to check the underbelly of the compartment that houses the battery, you'd find only drips of paint that flowed there when the sides were painted. Another point of concern was that the tank extensions flow down quite a bit and the bottom area is left unfastened. This, contrary to the company's claims of a noiseless experience, caused quite a bit of rattling. Both bikes use the same switchgear but different instrument clusters. Unfortunately, on the bikes I rode, they were extremely poorly lit, and even in the shade it was nearly impossible to make out what was on screen. On the brighter side, these unconventional color schemes and flashy graphics do attract some attention. We did have a couple of people walk up to us curious about where and who made these bikes. Okay, now that we've looked at the design and build quality, let's address what's under the surface. Both motorcycles use different motors and batteries, frames, suspension hardware and brakes. The KM4000 gets a USD fork and a twin disc brake setup at the front, while the fully fired KM3000 surprisingly is the lower spec model with the traditional telescopic fork and a single disc brake at the front. On the flip side, rather interestingly, this bike had the more pliant ride. Both bikes come equipped with CBS and the handlebar mounted front and rear brakes have a sharp bite. But on the downside, there is very little progression and feel from them, making the rear lock up quite easily. Lastly, despite having comparatively less bodywork, the street naked KM4000 is the heavier motorcycle by 9 kilos. We believe this could be because of its larger proportions and slightly bigger battery. The KM4000 is also the better spec model when it comes to the powertrains. So, this bike gets an 8 kW motor that is powered by a 4.5 kWh battery pack, while the Super Sport employs a 6 kW motor and a slightly smaller 4 kWh battery, and consequently a lower claimed range. The spec sheet tells us that the 3000 is capable of a top speed of 100 km per hour, but that definitely wasn't the case with the unit I was riding, because it topped out under what felt like 50 km per hour. There was no way for me to be certain because the speedometer on my bike didn't work. This wasn't the case with the KM4000, which felt like a much livelier bike. It felt decently quick, and even though the speedometer topped out at 50 km per hour, I'm quite sure it was actually going much quicker than that. Having said that, I'm also certain of the fact that I was nowhere near the claimed top speed of 120 km per hour. The claimed range figures are impressive as well, but we'll only know if they're accurate once we've properly tested these motorcycles.
Kabira Mobility tells us that it intends to take on the Revolt RV line of motorcycles with these two new models. So far, dealership presence has been centered around Goa and select locations in South India, namely Andhra Pradesh and Karnataka. But it will soon have more touchpoints than the 27 that it has now.
However, there is plenty of improvement required from these products, especially for the prices they command. The KM3000 will set you back by Rs 1.27 lakh, while the naked KM4000 costs 10,000 more. Going by what we've experienced with these two, we'd recommend you look elsewhere if you're considering an EV.